This is Mark and Charity's Coffee Podcast.
Mark and Charity Coffee Podcast. It's Wednesday, March 29th. Heavy-duty, important podcast today. Unlike the morning show today that had limericks.
Which are always important and fun to listen to.
Top of our head. We're very creative.
Mark is.
Top of the head limericks. But on the show, Director of Education, Katherine MacIver of the Hastings Prince Edward District School Board, because they've gone through one of their, supposed to be every 5 years, but the pandemic has had 2 in the last 3 years, a capital allocation plan, long-term, so LCAP. As you'll hear when she talks about it, everything's an acronym in education.
Yes.
LCAP.
Well, it kind of has to be.
Yeah.
It's a long title.
And like healthcare, too, everything's an acronym.
Yes.
But it arrives in phases. So they go out and they sample geography and population growth and boundaries of schools and how many kids they project we're going to have over the next 5 years that'll be entering and moving on to high school, all this sort of stuff.
And they do work with other organizations, too.
Absolutely.
As she said, they work very closely with the municipality and to get all these numbers and to be as accurate as they can be.
Very encompassing.
Yes.
Great deal of foresight goes into it. Past LCAPs, for example, arrived at Quinty Secondary School needing to close. Like we all remember that from a few years ago. That was not a willy-nilly. And then the public was asked which of the schools should we close. So there was a process. Not everybody was happy with the outcome, but everybody was given the opportunity. So on the podcast today, we want you to hear from the Director of Education what sort of information they've arrived at and how you can next, very soon, by going to their website or going to a town hall meeting, get your input on what you're about to read. So we offered the opportunity for her to come by to talk about the latest results from their LCAP.
So that's our long-term capital accommodation plan, and it's our projections about the number of students that we'll have in each of our buildings and the amount of space that we have to accommodate those students.
How often do you do a study like this?
Well, we've done them more recently. We did it last year, and we updated it this year as a result of some of the shifting dynamics as a result of coming through the pandemic. And we've seen population growth in Belleville.
Yeah.
So we needed to make sure that our numbers are up to date. But generally, 3 to 5 years is how often we would update a plan. If you have a look at the plan, it sits on our website. It is quite comprehensive. So there's a lot of work that goes into creating the plan, making sure we have the right data. We work with a consultant in order to get that data correct and to, access things that maybe as educators we wouldn't know, birth rates, census data, all of those kinds of pieces.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. What are some of the key things that you do look at or that you do try to learn about?
Well, birth rates are key. Because that helps to predict,
enrollment.
Who's coming in junior kindergarten and starting their education career. We work with a consultant, Watson and Associates, and fortunately, they are also working with our municipalities in the area. So we're able to collaborate between municipalities and education so that we can see and use the same data to be able to look at growth rates, things like that, census data.
Now, when we get those numbers, we see something like Queen Elizabeth, for example. So now we're building other schools and amalgamating other schools. That must be a difficult decision. Is it based on the geography within the city and what land's available to build? Like what key indicators decide what you do with this information?
So, education, we are full of acronyms. So we have something called the OTG, which is on the ground capacity.
Okay.
On the ground. So all of our schools are designated to hold a certain number of students in their classroom spaces. And so we compare projected population, and keep in mind, these are just projections. We wish we could get really scientific and know exactly how many students are going to walk through our door. That would be helpful, but things change and move with the times. But we compare our projected population to the on-the-ground capacity in each of our buildings to see if we have enough space and capacity for all of our students. You bring up Queen Elizabeth. It's a great example because we do have a new build there, which we're really excited about, East Hill Elementary School. But what we know is at the time that we received funding and permission to build that new school, we were able to show that our on-the-ground capacity and some of our buildings were really aging, which designated the need. But since that time, we've also had additional students move into those areas. And so the school that we're building is probably just big enough, or maybe not even big enough, to house the number of students we have now.
So then what do you do?
Well, then we get into things like portables. And the Ministry of Education sees portables as being a viable solution for capacity concerns. But it is, it is frustrating. And certainly we hear that from, our families, our students, and our staff to say, wait a minute, like you had projections that said we might grow. Yeah. Why did you build it this size? And it comes down to the money that the ministry is able to allocate to us is for the size and the students that we have at the time the money's allocated. And so we know the Ministry of Education is looking closely at this. They know that they need to build schools, and they're trying to close that window between approval and students entering a new building, because a lot can change in a short amount of time.
Do you see those changes happening quicker, I guess, more recently? Or is this just a phenomenon that's come up in the last few years because of COVID or the pandemic, or has this always been an issue?
So I would say, I think, listening to the city and our municipalities speak about COVID and the impact, Belleville saw a growth rate higher than the rest of our province did on average, right? So I think we were at 8.6% growth rate since our last census data.
That's a lot.
That is a lot.
It's
we heard people were moving this way, but that is a big jump, a huge jump.
And so what we're finding is it's impacting our schools and the capacity in our Belleville corridor specifically. We're filling our schools. So we need to have a look. And, some people would point to Harmony Public School. And so that was one of our fairly recent new builds. We're going to have 6 portables on site.
Wow.
Because of the population growth in that north end of the city. And so we need to look at that. We can't put any more portables on the property. We've sort of met capacity of the systems and the space. So now we have to look at boundaries. And so do we need to shift the boundaries of our schools that are north of the 401 in order to make sure that we have classrooms for all the students that we have coming in?
Wow.
Katherine MacIver, Director of Education for Hastings Prince Edward, talking about the LCAP this morning. Going back a few years, the last, I don't want to say controversial, but the last ones that raised eyebrows, for example, was closing Quinte Secondary School for East Hill. So things like that. So when you look at the growth now, was that still a good decision to make? Are we okay in high schools? Or do we have another decision to make in 5 years as this growth of grade school kids now become teenagers?
So it shows that our data shows that we're okay. In our secondary schools. Even if we look 5 years out, 10 years out, and the further we look out, the less accurate those projections likely are, because lots of things can change. We've learned that. But we do look like we have enough space in our secondary schools for our secondary students. We do have Quinte Secondary School. That's a favorite topic of conversation when people say, well, why don't you use that school? Why are we just sitting with this empty school? And it really comes down to permissions. The ministry, when we made the decision to amalgamate our 2 high schools, gave us funds to do some improvements to Eastside Secondary School as a result of closing Quinte. And now we need permissions to reopen Quinte. And rightfully so, the Ministry of Education is asking us, show us the numbers that show you absolutely need to reopen this space because we gave you money to close the space. Right? Fair. I think that's a fair question.
Oh, certainly.
And so, is it a part of the opportunity? It is. We submitted it as a capital request to the Ministry of Education. It wasn't approved. Lots of work went in through our community as far as how could we use this building. I think it is still something that we have on deck. If the opportunity presented itself again, we may resubmit that to see if we can get approval. But while we wait, we need another plan.
Right.
So that's what we're working on.
There was never the thought then of selling the property.
Well, I think that's always on the table, right?
Yeah. Okay.
We've had some conversations with municipalities around some of our properties that we have that they might be interested in from a housing perspective or from a development perspective. So at some point, we need to make a decision. The longer that building sits empty, the more expensive it is to rehabilitate and to reuse. And so, it can't, and it's in a great location. We can't leave it empty for very much longer.
With this report, what do you want families to take away from it? What do you hope sticks out for families or will stand out the most for families?
I worry about our families a little bit because I think this causes some anxiety sometimes. When we say that we need to look at boundaries and we need to look at what schools, certain communities or certain houses attend based on your address, that creates anxiety. I think what I want families to know is that we're committed to this next year to be doing some public consultation, to be looking at this really deeply, to hear from our families about preferences. Something we know has to change. So we can't just sit still and do nothing, but we want to engage people in that conversation about, as we start to look, we need to hear from them about what will work, what won't work. So on and so forth.
So they will have an opportunity then.
They will have an opportunity.
Talk to you and voice their concerns or opinions on what should happen.
Starting as early as this spring, some preliminary just information open houses, but then through next fall, because we are preparing for September of 2024. So we'll be okay for this September, but for September of 2024, we know our numbers show that something has to shift.
Okay.
So.
Wow.
And the results of the study then are available online for parents to read and
the results
formulate their thoughts?
The results of this study are online in the long-term capital accommodation plan. So it sits in our resources on our website. And there's also in the back of it, it has some ideas. Here's some things that we could look at doing. But those aren't decisions, and that's what we need to make clear. Those are just to get the conversation started. Here's some options we could look at. And some of the, we've done some digging as far as, what happens if we do this option? What happens if we do this option? So that's all laid out in the plan for parents to have a look at.
And she's so good to come in and talk about it. And she's very honest about it, too. Because as I said to her, then what? When you're already at capacity with the schools that you have, what do you do? And I think that's really what they want those answers. They want to know. And she said, well, we go to portables and we do that first. And then hopefully we can come to another solution by doing an LCAP or talking to people, getting feedback so we can figure out what's best for the students, for our families, and for the community. And I don't envy her at all.
Well, and you can hear the frustration in her voice on a couple of occasions. One, when, for example, when she says, well, the ministry believes that portables are acceptable. She didn't say we all think.
Exactly. That's not necessarily her feeling on it, but this is where we're at. This is an option. This is what we can do at this point.
This is what the ministry wants you to do. And then when we get talking about, East Hill Public being built, well, by the time it opens, it may be a capacity. Well, the idea, of course, in building a school 3-4 years down the line, which is when it's expected, is that you're given enough money to build a school this size. It would have been nice to build it bigger, but that costs more money. Government wasn't going to give you that much money. So it's a frustrating time from that point of view. So changes have to be made, or boundaries have to be moved, or maybe students that live on this street that go to this school, maybe next year it'd be a different school. You'd have to wait a little because now you get bused. It's all money.
Everything evolves. And we've seen it in this community, especially as she pointed out, especially with the pandemic, with people moving here. It does. It creates a ripple. Things have to move forward. They have to change. So you want to hang on to what you've had. You want to hang on to your little public school or the fact that the high school is within walking distance for the kids or a particular bus route. You want to hang on to these things because that's what you know and that's your routine. But in order to accommodate and to continue the level at which they're working at, we do need to change that. So it's better to have an opinion, and much like anything else, if you don't stand up and share that opinion, or if you don't try to work with them, then things are going to move without you. And you can't say anything afterwards.
Well, because at least if you're a part of it and you know why decisions are being made the way they are, you're less likely to take it personally. To say, well, why did that happen to us on this street or my kids and their friends? Okay, I see which way they have to make a decision. It's a tough one. I don't like it.
Well, and I don't envy her board, the school board in general, these people who have to make these decisions, because no, you're not going to make everybody happy. But as you said, if you can educate yourself, if you can learn about it, it makes it, I don't want to say easier, because if it goes the other way from what you're hoping for, it is hard. Don't want to take that away from you. But hopefully the decision can be made and make more sense. You can see, okay, well, I'm not happy about it, but I do understand that this has to be done. Yeah,
and as you said, not a lot of people, some people are still hanging out at the Quinte Secondary School. Yeah. Moira becoming East
and
Side.
Even that, even though it remained open, just the name change. Stirred up a lot of things for people.
So we thank her very much for coming in very early in the process. We're letting you know very early in the process so that by the time the town hall meetings start, you can get online and you can share opinions. I'll give you possible scenarios. What if we did it this way? So it's trying to be as transparent and as inclusive for everybody's wishes as possible. So we thank her very much for coming in.
And it is on the website, the Hastings Prince Edward District School Board website. It's right there under resources. And as you said, transparent. They're not hiding anything. You can go on, you can look, you can read and learn more. And do that.
Well, look, Mark and Charity, I was going to go out and mow my lawn today. No, you're not. It's going to snow this afternoon.
No, God, no. Oh, my God.
So we'll deal
with
that.
So far from that.
I know. Tomorrow, March 30th, a couple of things. Number one, first day of Major League Baseball. Charity and I are going to dress in our opposing teams. Charity's team, the Toronto Blue Jays, are top 10 in the power rankings to win the World Series.
Okay.
Top
this is
10.
Ridiculous.
162
the season
games
starts
to go.
Tomorrow.
Top 10.
Okay.
Do you know who number one is?
New York.
No, they're number 10.
Dodgers.
Yankees are number 10. Dodgers are number top 10.
Tampa Bay.
Houston,
really?
Defending champs.
All
Got them winning it again. Well, where are the Blue Jays in the top 10?
How can you even know? They haven't even started.
Because it's sports and stats, and we love it.
All right.
So start getting the stuff out with the baseball jerseys tomorrow and the hats, and we can't wait to see them on socials. Jays open up in St. Louis, of all places.
Oh.
Taking on the Cardinals tomorrow afternoon, 3 o'clock our time.
When's their first home opener?
I think they play a couple of road series, like June. I think they're home in time for Easter.
They get the West Coast done now.
Yeah. Wow, they'll do a few of those. But I think they're literally 7 or 9 games on the road. I could have that all wrong. But I think you're right. I think it's St. Louis, and I think they go out west. Play like Seattle or something.
I was going to say, it's still friggin' cold to be playing in Canada.
Oh, my gosh. I know. St. Louis isn't a lot better, but you're right.
No, but the dome's not ready. Can't go back.
Yeah. So get ready for that. And then Throwback Thursday for our April Fool's theme for Saturday is Fooling Everybody right now. I came in with Elvin Bishop's Fooled Around and Fell in Love, and then you sang it, Take the Who.
I'm going to take the Who.
Won't Get Fooled Again, and I went, dastardly.
But at the time of the recording, you are winning.
That's crazy.
By 2 votes.
That's nuts. Okay, so it may come out the
It's
time.
close. It's going to be close.
We're going to play the whole 8.5-minute version of Elvin Bishop's Fooled in Love.
You said that on the air.
Wait a minute, how long is that?
That cracked me up.
I will absolutely.
Good one, Mark. Good one.
I will absolutely cut an 8-minute version of that song. I will get his.
If he wins.
Yeah, I will get his people will be notifying us going, you can't mess with the song
just play
like
it twice.
That. Just stop. I'll do whatever I want. I work with Charity Brown. She'll protect. She's got lawyers. She's got people. So get your votes in on Facebook. That's coming up tomorrow, okay? Be safe on your drive late this afternoon. Thanks for joining us with the Mark and Charity Coffee Podcast.